Alright, so I have a question for you all, for the painted haters out there. That's what I'm calling my fans. What do you think, like, when I say Florida? Like, what comes to mind? Is it miles and miles of white sandy beaches, citrus fruit such as oranges, or like acne that's caused by citrus fruit? That happened to me, true story. Sunshine, old people, the CSI of your dreams. Like, seriously, come on, CSI Miami. Who wasn't gonna for Eric Delco? Because I was. Let me tell you something. Anyways, or do you think of the original Bromance? You know, Crockett and Tubbs. Or do you think of the illustrious band Dragon Sound? Oh my God, Against the Ninja, kind of a banger. Like, that song, it's on my iPod right now, or on my iPod. Wow, well, that sentence is an antique. But yeah. So what comes to mind when you think of Florida? Well, I'm willing to bet it is not Ghost. That's what I think of when I, think of the Sunshine State, in addition to what I said before. So, basically the theme of today's episode is we were here first. Sketches. I won't use the word that rhymes with that, but that's the theme of today's story, or today's show. And I mean, people, I'm guessing people outside of Florida, I don't think they think of the ghost stories that and the legends that surround this state. And I'm from Georgia, so I'm not saying it like I'm there, but I don't think that people really grasp how creepy Florida can be beyond Florida Man. So let's go ahead and dive into this episode. And this is Painted Haint, a travel normal podcast. So the first story we're going to talk about is the legend of Spanish moss. And honestly, if you've ever been to Florida or throughout the Deep South, then you've seen Spanish moss. It's like that curly hair, it looks like a stem. Like, it looks like, for the black people out there, like 3C hair, or 3C. I don't know. But it's like curly hair, like projections or whatever, that hang over the trees and shrubberies throughout Florida. And actually, I didn't realize this, but in the Caribbean as well. It's actually a plant, and the scientific name is Tilendasia. I believe that's pronounced Eusinoides. But do you know the legend behind the Spanish moss? Like, why is it there? Do you even know that there was a legend associated with it? So, the first time I heard this story, I was a child visiting St. Augustine as a Girl Scout. My troop had gone down there, and I think we did the ghost walk, or, my spooky ass found a book and was like, this is good, and read it, and I was like, this is terrifying. But I was recently reminded of this story while suffering from what I call the cruise blues. So we had just gotten off a cruise, and I was like, I'm really down. I miss the ocean already. And we were at Fort Lauderdale Airport. And if you know Fort Lauderdale Airport, it's pretty much like a mall at one point. And they had this huge bookstore. And I went to, of course, the Florida travel section. And that's where I found this book called Spooky Florida. And I highly recommend it. You can get it on Amazon. I think you can even listen to it on Audible. It was like $13 there, but, And it was perfect because, this is summertime in Florida, so they're having bad storms and whatnot. And so I'm sitting there with these flash and lightning and whatnot, reading these, or, going through this book. And while I'm going through the book, I come across the legend of Spanish moss, and I'm like, oh, it's here. So I'm going to relay to you the legend of Spanish moss if you don't want to deal with the book, or if you just want to hear me talk about it. So let's take it back to the 1500s, when Florida was called La Florida, or Pascua Florida. So the legend involves a Spanish conquistador sometimes he was referred to as Don Gorezgos, who came to the New World in search of gold and to tame the land. Whatever that means. So, in his company's search of gold, they would come across native inhabitants of the land, or First Nations inhabitants of the land. And of course, how did they respond to seeing these people who were already here? To quote Wiggins from Pocahontas, by invading their land, cutting down their trees, and digging up their earth. And also attempted genocide. Like, they really tried to off these people. Wiggins didn't say that part. That's not Disney PC, I added that. However, Gorez did capture one person. A maiden with long black hair and beautiful features. Like, all the legends that I researched for this said she was absolutely stunning. And so he immediately falls in love with her, and he tries to woo her with gifts and trinkets, like combs and like, oh, I got this pretty dress over here. Hey, you like this? And this woman was not having it, on account of the fact that she just watched him murder her entire village. Like, wow. I'm laughing because I'm like, these guys never get it. And so in true nice guy fashion, this conquistador gets angry. He will actually kill her and put her head on a pike to make an example out of her, basically saying, because I think there were other captives around that were women, and he was like, hey, if you see your girl, you see what happened to her, ask about me. But she is the one who is going to have the last laugh, so to speak, in this whole situation. So before she is murdered, she warns him and tells him, if you kill me, then my spirit will haunt you wherever you go. Now, naturally, the captain didn't believe her, given that he was a Catholic and therefore protected by God the Almighty. And he would then continue his conquest across Florida, kind of forgetting about her. Now, what is left out of my script is the fact that she beyond warning him verbally, she warns him in, I guess you could say, in spirit, because right after she is murdered, her hair starts to turn like this grayish white color, and it is freaking out the other conquistadors. Like, they were like, what is going on? And he's just like, whatever, I'm going to my tent to get drunk. So like I said, he goes on with his conquest of Florida, and sure enough, wherever he went, she would follow. And if I remember correctly, he is still just ignoring this whole thing, just like, guys, that's nothing, you guys are a bunch of bitches. Like, that's y'all really believe that that savage is gonna hurt my feelings or scare me? So the catch, though, is, or how she appeared rather, is she didn't appear as a full body apparition. So I mentioned how her hair looked. That hair begins to appear on trees and other vegetation throughout Florida, wherever this man went, and he's still telling his company, like, nah, that ain't her. So the way it's described is the way that Spanish moss looks today. So it's long, it's this grayish green color, and they're like tendrils, like I said, draped all over vegetation. And here's the thing, it wasn't just him that was affected. It was also his company. So the guys, the other conquistadors that were with him, they started to see this wherever they went. Excuse me. So yeah, it gets real for them as well. So that's the legend of Spanish moss. That's the supernatural reason why this moss appears hair-like across this region of the United States and down into the Caribbean. So now we go on to the eye for ghosts. This is another one. I heard this story on what was that? The Weather Channel. They used to have this episode, and it freaked my mind, because We traveled that corridor, that highway, a lot when I was a child. Like, we used to go to Daytona Beach like it was nobody's business. I thought we had like a home down there. We didn't. It wasn't even a timeshare. My mom would just be like, let's go to Daytona Beach. It's Saturday. And I'd be like, okay. Because what did I know? I was a child. But according to the Daytona Beach Journal and Floridians alike, the quarter-mile stretch of highway is haunted. Now, drivers have reported sudden drops in phone signal, static on CB radios, and apparitions. So, what is causing all of this? Like, is this even a thing? And this is a thing, by the way. Like, this is... that's a rhetorical question. Once again, we gotta jump in our time machine and go back to the 1870s to meet a man called Henry Sanford. So Sanford was a man from Connecticut who was an American diplomat and businessman, and he would found the town of Sanford, Florida. So in the 1860s, he would begin to invest money in Florida, purchasing 12,547 acres around what would become the city of Sanford. Now keep in mind, at this time, Florida is the wilderness. So, like, whenever I think about the 1800s and Florida, I think about Marjorie Kennan Rawlings, The Yearling. You know, the novel about a boy, and I'm gonna say it, YouTube, I'm sorry, his bitch-ass deer that wreaked havoc on his parents' farm. Like, I'm sorry. I'm gonna go on a tangent here. I'm sorry. Flag was trifling, and Jody was too blinded by love to realize it. Like, he ate all these people's corn, and they out here living in the straight-up sticks. But I digress. Where they lived, the Florida Big Scrub, as it was described in the novel, was how Florida looked when Sanford started investing his money there. He would head a project allowing for the immigration of Germans to come to Florida for the purpose of creating a Roman Catholic community, and it would be called St. Joseph's Colony. And it's at east of the town of Lake Monroe along the St. Johns River, which, I mean, side note, even though that area is haunted, it's absolutely beautiful. Like, I love crossing that bridge. It's so pretty. But starting this community created a workforce for the area, since I believe by that point slavery had been kind of on the downward swing, so people needed workers. So 4 German families would move to the area, but tragedy would strike in 1887 when the yellow fever swept through Florida. So according to sources, it started in Cuba and migrated to Key West, and then infected people in Tampa and Jacksonville. So in fact, the priest that served the community of St. Joseph's died from the disease in Tampa, close to the time the 4 members of St. Joseph's colony died from that same disease. So these 4 members will be buried away from the community to avoid infection of others, and the land where the Germans were buried would change hands in years to come. So people are calling this area the Field of the Dead. And it was first bought by a man called D.V. Warren, who found crosses on the property and tried to move them. So to be specific, he tried to tear down the fence that surrounded the graves, and his house gets burned down. So change hands to a family by the name of the Hawkins, and they would witness their children's rocking chair moving by itself, along with toys being played with by unseen hands. And that right there would be enough for me to be like, all right, I gotta go. I gotta get out of here. So it seemed that anybody who touched these graves had bad things happen to them. And this goes from adults to children. So, like, there was another story of a little boy who tried to dig up the graves. And I'm like, who raised you? Seriously? And he would die, like, a day later in a car accident. Or rather, a drunk driver would hit him. So it wasn't like he was in the car, but he was hit by a car. So fast forward to 1960, Florida becomes a serious tourist attraction. And it had been that way for years, starting after the Civil War. So traveling there evolved from trains and steamboats to the Dixie Highway, which was described in the Palm Beach Post as a patchwork of 2-lane roads running from Michigan to Miami. But a proper interstate was needed, and this is where I-4 comes into play. So the government would buy the Hawkins farmland, and while surveying the land, wait for it, the graves would be discovered, and nobody moved them because of course they didn't. These are the not so melanated, the clear people. So they weren't listening to nobody that had experienced strange happenings related to these graves. Instead, they covered the graves with fill dirt to build up the approach to I-4. And this is where the second part of the legend really pops off. So in September 1960, as they're covering the graves, a Category 4 hurricane named Donna would come roaring through South Florida. And to give you a sense of how strong this storm was, for those of you that don't know too much about hurricanes, when it made landfall in Key West, the winds reached to 145 miles per hour, and the storm surge was up to 13 feet or 4 meters. But here's the creepy part as it relates to I-4. So the storm was expected to completely avoid the area and move up into the Gulf of Mexico. Instead, it would change course and cross the site of I-4. The same thing would happen in 2004. So another Category 4 hurricane, Charlie, would hit the same area. And not to mention, the day that I-4 opened in 1963, there would be an accident involving a shrimp truck in which the driver was killed. And guess what? Accidents and ghost sightings are happening till this very day. So that was like that wasn't the only, accident that happened in that area. So people report seeing the spirits of the deceased yellow fever victims at the side of the highway. I've even heard stories of people being told by unseen voices to drive off the bridge into the St. Johns River. We go on to the next story. This is some CSI Miami shit. So there is something about the Everglades that is both beautiful and terrifying. I don't know. I mean, I know that sounds like cliche, but it's just, it gives that no one can hear you scream vibes. I'm really surprised the writers for CSI weren't like, hey, let's make a story out of this. And they could have. They did The Most Dangerous Game. So, established by Ted Smallwood in 1906, the Smallwood store is located on the western edge of the Everglades on an island called Chokolosky. This area had been inhabited by First Nations people, but they are not the subject of the story, surprisingly. It was actually the advent of white settlements in the area where the terror starts. So the Smallwood store was a trading post that was created due to families moving to the area for seasonal work. Very much like what we see in the book Their Eyes Are Watching God, in which Janie and TK go down to Lake Okeechobee to work. Forgive me, I'm a literary nerd, and that's just me. But like, if you've read that book or even seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. So essentially, people would buy furs, not buried furs, and hides in exchange for household necessities. So the Smallwood store would actually remain open until 1982. That's amazing. Like, I was like, that's so cool. And it is on the Register of Historic Places. And I'm like, oh, that's cute, right? Wrong. Enter Edgar Watson. So he came to Chokolosky, or the Everglades in general, in the early 1900s. So he was born in South Carolina in the early 1850s, and he would flee to Florida with his mother and sister to escape his abusive father. They would go to a place, or move to a place rather, called Fort White. But while the apple ran from the tree, it didn't fall far from it in attitude. So Edgar was said to be very violent, with a temper that led to fights, one of which resulted in a murder. And he would flee to Oklahoma, where he ran with the outlaw Belle Starr and Jesse James. I'm so sorry. And, I was reading that and I was like, man, everybody is like we need to be related to Jesse, or we need to tie him in with Jesse James, but he actually did. So, of course, wherever Edgar went, murder followed. He's like Spanish moss. Belle Starr would lease land to him, but when she found out he was wanted in Florida for murder, she told him to leave. And in response to this, Watson would shoot her in the back, killing her. Surprisingly, he was found not guilty of the murder, and he would return to Florida. But instead of going to Fort White, he would go to the Everglades. And there he would purchase 40 acres in an area called Chatham Bend. There, he would build a home and start farming sugarcane, naming his sugar brand Island Pride. And I've seen pictures of the house. This house is stunning. Like, it was a beautiful home that he had. Too bad he was a complete psycho. Now, processing sugarcane is not a one-man job, so of course he needed workers. And, he didn't just farm sugarcane. He actually farmed other things. It's just that sugarcane was like his cash crop. So he would go to places around Florida to hire workers, specifically migrant workers. Then, when they asked for their pay, he would kill them and toss their bodies into the river, hoping the gators would devour them. Or he would feed them to farm animals or just bury them on the property. So people in Chokoloskee and nearby Everglades City would discover these bodies floating in the river. And they wouldn't think anything of it because, it's not that they weren't like, that's weird. They didn't know where the bodies were coming from. I think they suspected him, but they really weren't 100% on this. But Edgar Watson would F up when he murdered a local family. And they weren't just local, they were well known in the area. Apparently, they were growing crops on his property. So he had bought this land and he told them to vacate it. And they were like, yeah, we'll move when we finish with our crops. But he wasn't having that. So he ends up murdering them and tossing them in the river. The sheriff in town would gather a posse and meet Edgar Watson at the Smallwood store, where they would ambush him and murder him. So he tried to get a shot off, but his gun jammed and they got him first. And they said you can actually still see his blood stain on the wall where the blood splatter. Edgar Watson's ghost is said to prowl the store, now turned museum. And as for his farm, the ghosts of his victims haunt the area as well. Because, see, here's the thing. When they went to investigate, they found a mass grave of bodies and body parts buried on the land. So the farmhouse is no longer there, as it was supposedly burned down by a woman who lived there. Apparently that's when she was fighting off spirits. I guess she was like, well, I'm gonna torch this because I'm not doing this today. But I was, when I was doing my research, I saw pictures, and apparently, like, pictures of the area, and apparently you can camp there. To which I say absolutely not. And I love how Google puts it. So this is Google's like glowing description of this area. Watson's Place in Everglades National Park is named after Edgar Watson, a sugarcane plantation owner and notorious outlaw who once lived there. Watson was a businessman and serial killer who lived in the 10,000 Islands, which surround Chokoloskee, in the 1890s. He grew vegetables and refined sugarcane in a 2-story house at the turn of the century. I mean, they did put in, I said they left out murderer, but still, it just sounds so, like, flowery and, like, cutesy. I'm like, no. And the owner of the museum turned store received calls from locals saying that they see lights in the building after hours, as though someone is still there. So, now that we've heard that horrific story, let's go to a palate cleanser. So the Everglades attracted a lot of interesting people other than outlaws. Enter C.G. McKinney. So this man abandoned his 5 kids and wife in North Florida with the family's nanny. He would later have 5 kids with the nanny and name these kids after the kids he abandoned. I see the Florida phenomenon is a spectrum. So it's like super crazy down to like, what the flip? Then there was the story of an unnamed resident of Chokoloskee who allegedly served on a pirate ship. So he would die at the age of 120 due to being caught in one of his fishing nets. My thing is, sir, what are you doing at 120 still trying to work? I mean, not to say you can't be sharp-minded then, but still, that's concerning. So he haunts the small wood store, and ghost hunters claim he is in the market for a new net. And before you say people can't live to 120, because I was one of those people that was like, you can't do that, I researched it, and yes, you can. So while I don't want to stay at Watson's place because F that, I would like to visit this part of Florida for all its eeriness. Old Florida, as I've heard it referred to, is a part of Florida you really don't see these days. And I don't mean like mermaid sideshow attractions. I mean like the old Florida as it relates to nature. I don't know if I really like to see communities and places. I don't know. I just really like to see communities and places like swamps where people, they flourished and like made a life for themselves. So, yeah. I was going to talk about Robert the Doll, but everybody talks about him, and I don't think he likes people to like talk about him like that, so I won't. But there probably will be some more Florida stories because why not? But this has been Painted Haint, a Travel Normal podcast, and I will see you on the next episode. And remember to please like and subscribe if you like what you hear. Sorry for the coughing. Allergy season is upon us. See you later. Bye.